Hello, hello.
Okay, go ahead and take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank
Hi.
Hi,
you.
Susan.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming out tonight for this. I hope I haven't been misrepresented or misrepresented myself in any way, because in fact, as is true with practically every world religion that I've spent any time at all with, I've kind of entered through the back door, not even knowing that I really was. I mean, I was, as a child, the only religion I had available to me was Christianity. And so I took that to the extreme. And then I met my dear beloved friend Byron Bowl, who was a liberal Catholic Church priest and my neighbor and my best friend, and also my landlord and my mentor. He was a huge person in my life, and he introduced me to Hinduism and Buddhism and theosophy and all kinds of things. So, but in the meantime, I started practicing or studying traditional Chinese medicine. So some of you know, and some of you don't know, that by trade, I'm an acupuncturist. And I have been for 34 years. And my early academic training was in classical Chinese medicine, which is well, we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that as we move through this tonight's topic. But I happened to find a teacher who was actually the first licensed acupuncturist in the state of California, which is a really big deal because California kind of leads the nation. So she was primarily responsible for acupuncture in the United States. And she was thrown into jail for practicing without a license. And that prompted Ronald Reagan to make acupuncture an experimental medicine. And then we could practice under MDs. And later, when Ronald Reagan was our California governor at the time. And later, when Jerry Brown came into office, he made us primary care physicians. And so we no longer had to practice under an MD. But Miriam had studied with a person very briefly named Master Dong. And Master Dong was from Shandong, China. And he was a Taoist. And he had a very special kind of Chinese medicine, which I learned from both Miriam and our joint teacher, Dr. Yang Wei Chia. Now, Dr. Yang Wei Chia was a direct disciple of Master Dong. And so he tutored Miriam while she was studying with Master Dong. And then Miriam, in turn, brought him to the United States to teach us Dong's acupuncture. So my training, I had classical acupuncture training in a college, the American College of Traditional Chinese Medicine in San Francisco, and that was I started in 1982. I was 23 years old, and then I studied with Dr. Young, and practiced alongside Miriam Lee in her clinic for 12 years. And she and I went to China in 1987, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it was a profoundly eye-opening and mind-expanding experience for me to be in the clinic of this woman who would see 100 patients a day. I mean, at that time in the 80s, there weren't very many acupuncturists around, and she was enormously popular because she got fantastic results. And she got fantastic results seeing 10 people at a time. So she had 10 tables and her beds were always full. And she had 10 chairs in the waiting room and they were always full. And she started at 5:30 in the morning and she ended at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And she was in bed by 7:30, and then we all got up and did it again. And so I had the unique and incredibly blessed opportunity to study with someone um, who could show us a very interesting way of using acupuncture. And what's different about Master Dong's approach is not just that it was Taoist, but in its Taoist nature, it was very simple. Now, it wasn't that it was dull small or insignificant. It was actually quite significant because with the fewest possible needles, he would get the most profound results. So while regular textbook acupuncture and all acupuncture schools at the time were doing tons of needles, 10 needles, 20 needles, 30 needles sometimes. I mean, people do crazy things with acupuncture, in my opinion. And they also needle the area that's in pain. We would do the opposite. We would do 2 needles or even 1 needle sometimes, or maybe 5 needles or 6 needles, but we would never do 20 needles or 30 needles. And we would never needle the area, the affected area. We would go to the opposite leg. If it was a shoulder, we'd go to the opposite leg. If it was the neck, we'd go to the ankles. We do the opposite end of the body and the opposite side of the body, which was very esoteric in acupuncture circles. It just wasn't known. It's still not really known. I mean, most people know about this style of acupuncture because of Miriam and because of me, and Dr. Yang also teaches a lot throughout the world. But still, most people have not studied it. It's a wave that hasn't even crested yet. But people are catching on that there's something unique about this. And I'm sure that that uniqueness had something to do with Taoism. But at the time I was learning it, I was not familiar with Taoism, and I didn't understand the connections because both of my teachers, now Master Dong was dead by that time. Dr. Yang and Dr. Miriam Lee were my primary teachers, both students of Master Dong, and they were both Christian. And so neither one of them emphasized the Taoist nature of Dong's acupuncture. In fact, they kind of went the other way in terms of Christianity, not proselytizing. They were never that kind of Christian, but Miriam actually Miriam had 8 brothers, and she begged her parents to not make her marry because somehow she'd had enough brothers. And so they said, well, if you will teach the word of the Lord, we will allow you not to marry. And so that is what she did. She on the ceilings above every treatment table, she had a psalm that everyone would lay and read as they got their treatment. And that was her way of honoring her parents and her promise and all of that. So she was a midwife in China, and then she came to the United States. And that's a whole long other story, which I would love to tell another time. But so I had this sort of back door into Taoism. And then towards the end of my acupuncture training, I met another teacher, and he was a Taoist. He was from the Black sect of Taoism, and he taught me feng shui. And feng shui is another Taoist tool, and that tool is used to. Feng shui is really about energy moving through space. So it is set up with a bagua, and I'll show you what the bagua looks like in a little bit. But it's about the art of divination and placement. So I primarily learned feng shui in order to understand the flow of energy through a space, where to put the furniture, where to put the door, where to put the lamp. You know, there's an art to that, and it's the art of feng shui. So that was my second exposure to Taoism. And then after I graduated long after I graduated and had been in practice for probably 25 years, I met another Taoist teacher who I became very close to, and her name was Elizabeth Rochat de la Valliere, and she is a Taoist scholar, and she is in Paris, France, and has written many, many books on many, many things, but her main gig is Taoism, and she taught many classes. I took a 2-year program with her, along with other acupuncturists. So it was a study from practitioners rather than students. And we talked a lot about Lao Tzu, who was a famous, very famous Taoist. Most of you have probably heard of Lao Tzu. but we also studied Chuanzi, and we studied Huainanzi, which is the art of war, but it's a Taoist text. So I got more exposure about real Taoism through Elizabeth. At the same time, I wound up, I had all these crazy neck issues. I wound up having 3 fusions in my neck. And when I woke up from the first surgery, I had no use of my arms. It was rather shocking and surprising. And it took me an entire year to get the use of my arms back. And I did that through the help of my friend that I had met in Miriam's clinic called Dr. Ta, Dr. Huang Viet Ta. And Huang Ta was well, I say was because he died in March. And he was a very, very close friend of mine. He was also a practitioner of Master Dong's points and studied with my teacher Miriam and me, and that was in around 1986 or so. But Wang was a master, a Qigong master, a martial artist, a Shaolin martial artist. He was the highest order of martial artist. And he, in his acupuncture clinic, he became my practitioner, is why I brought that up, because when I didn't have use of my arms, I went to see Huang because I knew that he could help me. So in his clinic, he taught Qigong classes, several different kinds of Qigong classes for all of his patients to attend. So in his practice, I learned Qigong and a Taoist form of Qigong, actually 2 different forms I've learned. He taught 3, but I focused on 2 primarily. And so I had this other avenue of Taoism coming into my life. And in many schools of Taoism, it is thought that you learn like with Qigong, you learn the external moves, you learn the moves, even though it's called, I'm kind of fighting with myself around calling it internal or external, because Qigong is actually internal medicine. It's internal exercises. It's moving the body in particular ways that stimulate particular meridian pathways and organ systems in the body. There are specific moves that are used to work different channels and energy flows throughout the body. And so you can heal your body this way, but the Taoists felt that you could use these internal exercises as a way of healing and achieving immortality, longevity and immortality. And so I'm going to kind of drop that for now. That was just a kind of overview of how I got into Taoism, but I would not say that I was a Taoist practitioner. Okay, I'm not a Taoist practitioner. I have studied Taoism in all those ways that I've just mentioned to you, but I can't, I mean, though I have a Qigong practice, I can't say I have a Taoist practice, because bottom line is I'm a theosophist. So I love nothing more than to study all the different approaches and how they are similar and how they are different. And so if I can't say I'm a Taoist over a Buddhist, I couldn't say that. I couldn't say I'm a Buddhist over a Christian. I couldn't say that. So so I would say I have a meditation practice. I would say I have a Qigong practice. I would say I have I used to have an acupuncture practice. I've now closed my acupuncture practice. So since September, it's the first time in 34 years that I don't have an acupuncture practice. And I'll be moving down to Ojai shortly and hanging out with many of you. Looking forward to that and some lively discussions about all kinds of things, hopefully. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of what I know, okay, of Taoist history, but I'm not an expert. I'm not a scholar. I haven't focused specifically on Taoism. I just sort of fell into Taoism because it was a part of my own healing journey, and it was a part of my own education into Chinese medicine. So if we want to take if we want to pull back as far as possible, we can think about the secret doctrine and talking about the rise of the Chinese civilization with the fourth root race. So we can say really Taoism has its origin, the kernel of its origins in the fourth root race, which means it's very, very old. So the fifth root race was the Aryan race that included Hinduism, and that began 2 million years ago. No, that ended 2 million years ago. So, so really, Taoism predates Hinduism or the Vedas, but it was never called Taoism. Okay, there was just the rise of Chinese civilization. Now the Vedas were sung. They were hymns that were sung, and so they were not written down. They were passed down. But they actually came through fairly intact because they were sung. Now, the Chinese, they were very good at recording things. So they like to write things down. And so we see the golden age in Vedic history, but we also see the golden age coming through with the early emperors in China. They say the first human emperor in China was the Yellow Emperor. And he apparently had two sovereigns that were considered divinities that ruled before him. But with the golden age, we see the information coming from out of China from about 27, well, it's literally 2674 BCE. So BCE means before the Common Era, used to be before Christ, but now they say Common Era instead. So just to be politically correct, you know. So anyway, from roughly 2700 BCE until about 2100 BCE, we see what was considered to be the Golden Age. And this is when when the Yellow Emperor and his successors had the most perfect government. They had government from right action, from right, let's see, what do I want to say about that? Well, I'm going to read you a few notes that I took. Okay. The Yellow Emperor was considered the first ruler of China and the patron saint of Taoism. Also part of the Golden Age, the age of perfect government, when heaven and earth were said to be in complete harmony. And it is during that time that we see the roots of traditional Chinese medicine and Taoism. And though those teachings have been radically modified over the years, the modern versions may be significantly different from their original. But unlike the Vedas that came down virtually intact, Chinese medicine and Taoism has changed many, many times over the years. If we fast forward now to around between 600 BCE, 550, 500 BCE, this is when we see modern Chinese philosophy. This is when we see Taoism, which was the oldest, Buddhism, and then Confucianism. These three primary philosophies were kind of blended in Chinese thought. You would see them intermingling with each other, but not from the very beginning. In the beginning, actually, the Buddhists and the Taoists would argue quite a bit because, well, let's start with Confucianism. Confucianism, the younger of them, was all about ethics and values and rules and your relationship to your family, your relationship to your community, your relationship to your nation. It was based on rites and rituals and organization and obedience, which was not at all how Buddhism and Taoism felt about things. The Buddhists were really coming from a place of of relationship and of personal growth so that you could better serve humanity, serve or all sentient beings. So Buddhism felt like through reincarnation, you would change your clothes. You'd change your body like you'd change your clothes. And so the emphasis wasn't so much on perfecting the body and longevity. It was really more on perfecting the inner world and your relationship to life. And the Taoists had a very different view. The Taoists really felt like they actually felt that the body belonged to the parents, didn't belong to the person. It belonged to your parents, and that we only got one body. And so we needed to learn how to maintain the body and how to well, they were famous for their alchemical practices. So the Taoists were alchemists, and they felt like they could prolong and heal the body through various different processes, alchemical processes. And so they would call this internal alchemy. And to that end, they offered a particular style of living. Diet and exercise were very important to them, but meditation was also extremely important. And the bottom line was that they were looking to create the elixir of life, the elixir of immortality. And by many different names, I mean, every world religion has a name for that. You know, that would be called the moon fluid, and the Vedas would be call it the moon fluid, and in Taoism it was the elixir. So so there were lots of arguments between these three factions until in more modern times. So we're talking about, you know, still BCE, a few hundred years, they started to blend, and we see that the leaders of the Buddhists wrote down a beautiful, beautiful story of Taoism called Journey to the West, and it was a story that was written. It's a Chinese fable, really. It's quite an amazing fable. I have some notes here. I'm jumping around quite a bit, but I'm gonna look at that for a second. Okay, The Journey to the West is a wonderful story, 4 volumes, or there's an abridged version, and I've packed up most of my books, so I can't show you that, but I can highly recommend The Journey to the West. So, this was, sorry, the Taoist leader, I'm not sure if I said that backwards, but this was written by the Taoist leaders for the Buddhists, in honor of the Buddhists. They wrote down The Journey to the West, and it's a very, very lovely classic story that all Chinese people recognize. This is there's movies, there's children's books. All children know the story of The Journey to the West. And it involves the Monkey King, who was born from stone and nourished by the 5 elements, and learned the Taoist arts of transformation, combat, and the secrets of immortality. And he traveled together with a monk, a pig, and the devil. And so for 16 years, in order to search and find Buddhist scriptures. So I have both the 4 volume and the 1 volume, and I highly recommend the 1 volume. I wish I could show it to you, but the one I like is by Anthony Yu, if you want to look that one up. So in honor of the Taoists, the Buddhists wrote down the 5 elements of martial arts. So the five elements are water, wood, fire, earth, and metal in Chinese medicine. And these are very, very important to how the Chinese eat and live and think about the seasons and cycles of life. The five elements are crucial and central to medicine, but also to many other aspects of Chinese culture. When I'm treating a patient, I'm going to take a long history from them. I'm going to ask them about just about everything I can think to ask. And then I'm going to draw a five element figure for them and plug in their symptoms and show them how, from a five element point of view, how I'm perceiving what's happening in their body, where the imbalances are, how they got that way, and what they need to do in order to correct it. So I use the five elements quite extensively, primarily though as a theoretical tool for diagnosing and also explaining Chinese medicine. So, but the five elements relate to all different parts of Chinese culture, and especially in Taoism, and the different organ systems that are stimulated by different exercises that are done. And I'm going to show you some charts about that in a little bit. Let me see if there's anything else I want to tell you. Well, yeah, so what the Christians might call God, the Taoists would call the Jade Emperor. And the Jade Emperor lives in the Jade Palace. So the Jade Palace might be the equivalent of what might be called heaven by the Christians. They recognize the three pure ones, and the three pure ones are the Jade Emperor and Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is supposed to be the reincarnation of the Yellow Emperor from the Golden Age. And then the third is Bangu, a primal man. So, and in addition to that, in addition to the pure ones, they also recognize the eight immortals. Well, in Chinese medicine, in Taoist medicine, or in Taoism, I should say, the immortals are basically the adepts, and they have hundreds of immortals, and the immortals are very important. And when I was in China in 2010 in Qingdao, which happened to be where Master Dong Ching Chang, the one whose medicine I teach, was situated. And he had his family. He lived there for a long time. He was from northern China, but he lived in Qingdao for a long time. And I was able to go to the Taoist temple that he frequented and walk the, I don't know, it was thrilling for me to walk the ground that he walked at one time. And it was the temple of the Fox Immortal. So, so anyway, Taoism has lots of deities, and they call them immortals. From Taoism, we have Chinese alchemy, we have Chinese astrology. We also see from ancient China, Zen Buddhism or Chan Buddhism, many different kinds of martial arts, traditional Chinese medicine, and feng shui. They are all intertwined with Taoism. So for me personally, learning about Taoism has been this sort of piece together thing that's happened over the last 30 years. It's not something that I've spent my entire life studying, but it's very interesting and it makes sense to me. And I'm guessing I've probably been in Chinese culture many lifetimes, probably because I was going through a baby book. I'm packing up, all my stuff. And I was going through my baby book the other day that my mother had saved for me. And here are these tiny little drawings of Chinese people with these funny little hats, rice paddy type hats and braids. And I couldn't have been, they were almost stick drawings. I was probably 3 or 4 making these funny little things. So, so they came from somewhere. Anyway, I'm very comfortable in Chinese culture and I understand a lot about it. Let's go back I guess to Taoism in particular, it teaches an introspective type of meditation, and the process or and primarily focuses on observation, but silent observation. It's tuning into the natural flow of life, the spontaneous and natural flow of life, a reality that is beyond words and concepts. And so we see in chapter 1, starting with the Tao that can be named is not the real Tao, because you can't speak about the real Tao. There's no description for the real Tao. It has its roots in Chinese shamanism and and the ones that were once referred to as the mountain hermits. Taoism also has a very strong matriarchal, roots. The ancient shamans were women. And so we see strong voices of both male and female types in Taoism. Taoism teaches what's called the effortless effort, the Wei Wu Wei, which means action, no action. And basically what that's telling us is that we do by not doing. So it doesn't mean you sit around on the couch all day and don't do anything. It means you try to match match your will with the harmony of the universe. You want, it's not about not having a will. It's about embracing the will of the universe with your own will. And so that there's no resistance, there's no agenda, there's no likes or dislikes. There's simply the Tao, there's simply the path, there's the way. So the Tao actually means the way. And we had the famous author Lao Tzu was around 400 BCE. And he wrote, well, there's a lot. When I say he wrote, I automatically have to correct that, because it's not clear whether Lao Tzu was a fictitious character or a real person. There are many stories about Lao Tzu riding on the buffalo, okay, the buffalo representing the lower mind, taming the lower mind, riding on the buffalo. So it's hard to say if the Tao Te Ching that the Tao Te Ching was actually written by Lao Tzu or by other people who wound up, calling themselves Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu really means old man or old teacher. But pretty much, everybody knows in China that that he could be fictitious, but they prefer to think of him as actual. So it's not they don't have a problem with that. They're happy with that. And the Tao Te Ching was so profound. It was actually translated into 250 different languages, which matches the Bible. The two of them are kind of equal in that way. It's been translated in more languages than any other religion except for Christianity or the Bible. So let's see. The goals are to be achieved effortlessly, and in order to attain naturalness, one must be free from selfishness and desire and appreciate simplicity. It is the path of internal alchemy. So I am going to show you some slides about the 5 elements and about the trigrams and the Bagua and things that have to do with Taoism. But first, I'm going to talk just a little bit about the different books that are written about Taoism, or the primary books of Taoism. There's something called the Tao Zang, or the Treasure of Tao. And that's the Taoist canon. It's said to include 1,500 different texts. But the Tao Zang is actually an oral tradition. Even though it has 1,500 texts, it's taught from teacher to student or teacher to disciple. It is not so much read. So few people have actually heard about the Tao Zang. So the three primary books of Taoism that most of you have probably heard of are the Tao Te Ching, Chuanzi, and the I Ching. So Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching in 400 BCE. It is the way of virtue or the way of power. It is natural, spontaneous, eternal, nameless, and undescribable. Chuanzi is a contemporary, but a little bit later than Lao Tzu. And he is probably one of the most important authors of Taoist text. He wrote the inner chapters and a book that's called Chuanzi. Chuanzi has the inner chapters, and then his students wrote what are called the outer chapters. And he was one of the hermits, the recluses, and shamans of ancient China. The I Ching it comes from 1150 BCE, and that's a divination system. The I Ching is mathematical. It has to do with 64 different trigrams. We're going to see some trigrams in some slides in a few minutes. So the trigrams of the I Ching are used. You may have heard of throwing the I Ching. It's a way of dowsing or divining using coins or sticks. And, it's just another one of those marvelous tools like astrology and numerology and, there's infinite numbers of different kinds of tools that we can use if we want to, but it's interesting to study that a little bit and see how it applies to feng shui and astrology and alchemy and all of that. So we'll talk some more about that in a few minutes. The three treasures or the three jewels of Taoism are compassion, moderation, and humility. They also speak of wisdom, healing, and longevity, and also the Jing Qi Shen. Jing Qi Shen means essence, life force, and spirit. So these are parts of Chinese medicine that are very integral to the way that I think about healing and health. And they have direct roots in Taoism. So I studied primarily with Elizabeth Rochat de la Valliere, the Jing Qi Shen, but they were mentioned in my academic training as well. But the focus wasn't so much on spirituality as it was on physicality and body stuff and herbs and acupuncture and all of that. And there was so much to learn that we didn't get very much training in the inner realms. But we understood that the Jing, what is called the Jing, is the most precious of human fluids. So Jing would be tears. Jing would be bile. Jing would be semen. Sperm is Jing. Jing is called the most precious thing. So, and it is what the body itself produces. So Jing would also be this elixir of immortality that the Taoists were trying to cultivate and through their various different practices, meditation and Qigong, in order to reach that stage of immortality. And so in Chinese medicine, we think about preserving the Jing, not wasting the Jing, holding on to that. And then they talk about the Jing, the Qi. So Qi is vital energy or life force. So we talk a lot about Qi, different kinds of Qi, so many different kinds of Qi, and wielding the Qi. So when I'm doing acupuncture, I am stimulating the pathways of this vital force in the body that have been recognized from, way from the golden ages. So we're talking 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. They were recognizing these energy flows in the body and how they could to utilize those. And then the Shen is what, so we have Jing, we have Qi, and we have Shen. And the Shen is the spirit. So this would be the connection to what is not the body, what is beyond the body, and the place of the Jade Emperor and the Jade Palace, which is where we all hope to arrive one day. So I think that I think we're running out of time, and there's so much to talk about. So I think I'm gonna jump into a few slides here, and let's see. So you're gonna have to make me the host, I think, so I can share the screen. Is that true, Michelle?
Yes, I already did.
Okay.
So you should be able to-
So you can see my screen right now.
Right.
Is that true? Yes. Okay, so this is my friend, Dr. Huang Ta. He's the one who taught me Qigong and took care of me with his Chinese medicine. He was a master herbalist. He also studied Dong's points, and he's on my desktop in a little collage. This is actually not my usual computer. My usual computer is in the shop. So I put this little collage on this computer of him, but I forgot it was there until I drug this one out. And so you're gonna see a little, some of his smiling faces in the background to be covered up with a few other things. So this is the calligraphy or the pinyin for Tao, the Tao. And I love this. Well, I love to study calligraphy because it's so beautiful. But this is the path here, the way. And anyhow, there's something about, I think I have spent a great deal of time writing calligraphy, because when I look at something like that, my mind expands and I go to a different place. The symbol of Taoism looks like this. So in that you see the yin yang of that probably most of you recognize. And then these are called trigrams around the outside. We're going to see a few more of those shortly. So this was written on the collapse of civilization, or I called it the collapse of civilization, but I have to sort of, how do I get these? Maybe I pull this over here.
Yeah, we can see it okay.
You don't see all of yourself covering it?
No.
Oh, you don't? Okay, okay. So probably most of you have already read this, but it's Lao Tzu said in the Tao Te Ching that when the Tao is lost, human beings take up virtue. And when virtue is lost, human beings insist on love. When love is lost, people demand righteousness. And when righteousness is lost, people rely on propriety. When propriety is lost, the law is sought. But when the law is lost, force is sought. And when force is sought, all traces of civilization are lost. So with Taoism, the primary method was one of non-force, was one of acceptance of what is and moving with the flow. And when you're in the proper flow, in the flow of humanity, then or the flow of the harmony of nature, then force would never be your you would never resort to force. So these are called the universal principles of government or private organizations. The size of the government must be small. The laws and regulations must be simple and few. Policies must be honest. Economics must be fair. Taxes must be low. Population must be controlled and freedom must be protected. Education is a priority and military expenditures are limited. The leader must voluntarily retire. Now, can you imagine a government based on these principles? These are the three treasures, as I mentioned earlier. Be kind, compassion to all people and other organisms. Be thrifty and be humble. I'm going to keep going because we're running out of time quickly. We have something called the 5 elements, which are, I've mentioned a little bit already, and many of you have heard of, but these are a way of understanding flow that we recognize as having 2 different cycles in the body. Trying to get, yeah, okay, there we are. So there, in Chinese medicine, we think about it in terms of what's called the mother-child cycle, and then the Ko cycle and the Shen cycle. So the mother-child is that one produces the other, produces the other. So every element has an organ that's associated with it. So water element belongs to kidney, and wood element belongs to liver. The fire element belongs to heart, and the earth element belongs to spleen. The metal is lung. So we see that in this production cycle, water grows wood, and wood creates fire. Fire makes earth, and earth makes metal. And so there's this production of one organ system following the other. And this is how the ancients saw the dynamics between organ systems in the body. Now, when I first started studying Chinese medicine, I thought, oh, good heavens, how am I going to actually do this? Because I came from Western medicine. My mother was an operating room nurse and an emergency room nurse, and my grandmother as well. So I was expected to be a nurse, right? But I wanted to be a doctor, and I wanted to study alternative medicines, not pharmaceuticals. So I went into Chinese medicine much against the desires of my family. And when I first started hearing about these elements, I couldn't relate, especially when we talked about, for example, liver wind. Wood is fueling fire. And when there's excessive wood, which means too much liver, excessive wood creates too much fire. So there's a draft. And we recognize that draft in the body as vertigo, as migraine headache, as high blood pressure. It makes sense now to me, but the first day of acupuncture school, they threw us in the deep end, and I started thinking, oh no, how am I going to do this? Put my fingers in my ears and because whoa, this is crazy. But now I recognize liver wind passing me on the street. It's a very beautiful way of understanding the energy flow within the body, and when it's in harmony and when it's in imbalance. So we have this mother-child cycle, which keeps everything generating the next thing, the next thing. And then we have the cycle of controls, of checks and balances. So we see that water puts out fire, and fire melts metal, and metal chops wood, and wood breaks up earth, and earth makes mud out of water. It's checks and balances in the body that makes a lot of sense. So when I'm seeing a patient, I'm going to take a history, and then I'm going to make a little list next to each of these elements, how their symptoms fit into this 5-element picture, and help them understand how they got sick and how they're going to get well, and what they're going to need to do in order for that to take place. And so we might have, for example, if the kidney water is weak, it can't put out the heart fire, and it can't grow healthy wood. So we have unhealthy wood fueling the fire that's not being put out by water. This looks like anxiety. Okay, this looks like insomnia. So if we have excessive wood, it over controls the earth. It taxes the earth, which is the spleen, and stomach has to do with the digestive process. So this could be a liver excess looking like a migraine headache with nausea and vomiting, okay, over controlling the digestive process. So you see, when you study the 5-element theory, you learn to see in a different kind of way that Western medicine will never understand. But fortunately, Chinese medicine and the 5 elements are becoming more known. we have different exercises relating to the different elements. So here you can see the elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, water. There's 2 different kinds of fire. I'm not going to go into that. And then there are the different exercises that have animal names. Okay, there are far more than this, but these are just a few. And they stimulate different organ systems. So Qigong is used as a tool for health and well-being, and to bring the whole body back into balance so that all the organ systems can work properly and in harmony with each other. I put this saying in just because I like it. When you do external exercises, you must do internal exercises. But when you do internal exercises, you may forget to do the external exercises. So what they're saying is that when you practice Qigong or martial arts, also Tai Chi Chuan is also very popular in Taoism and Chinese culture. Tai Chi and Qigong are both considered internal exercises, as are many, many different kinds of meditative practices. Here are just some categories of the different exercises that can be done. We won't spend much time here, but they're categorized, you know, for mental and physical, for nerves, for energizing, for healing, for balancing hormones. One more list. This one might be a little hard to see. So you can see there's a lot of different ones with animal names, but there's also bone breathing for relaxation and toe wiggling and body stretching. There are eye exercises, beating the heavenly drum. So you can go down this list yourself and see many different, it's a highly, highly developed system of medicine. It is very old. It is very unique and is incredibly powerful. I think I have to skip the stomach rubbing exercise for now. Okay, so remember the symbol of Taoism has the yin yang in the center and the trigrams around it. So these are the origin of the trigrams. I can't really spend much time here because we're supposed to be ending, I think, in 3 minutes. So I just want you to know that the trigrams relate to the male and female in the family, and also to the well, wind, water, mountain, earth, thunder, fire, lake, and heaven. This is part of the I Ching, and here is where and this is used for the Bagua of Feng Shui, directing the 9 directions. So we have the middle is a direction. So we have 8 directions. And these are the different, like Li is fire and Kan is water. And so we have north and south, we have east and west, and then the other 4. And between all of these are, we can make a total, in combining them, we can make a total of 64 hexagrams. And these are mathematic equations to create these hexagrams that are used for the I Ching. It's an incredibly beautiful system. And very hard to study, very deep. But you can learn to throw the I Ching for fun if you want. I put in a Bagua. This is a Bagua from Feng Shui. The Bagua is the same, you know, shape you can see. So here's Kan and Li. So Li is fire, Kan is water. And we lay the Bagua with the entry to a site. So this is the door into a room. This is the door into the house. This is the door into a building. And so from that, we can measure or find the different areas related to that building and make choices about whether it's going to be a good place or not. What do I really want to say about that? When I started to study feng shui, I found that I had some kind of understanding that was prior to that. So, for example, I had my teacher come to my office that I had many years ago now, not the one I just closed. And in putting the front door, laying the bagua out with the front door here, I discovered that I had put a lamp in the wealth corner of my office unknowingly about 3 weeks before he came. And in that 3 weeks time, I can't explain it except that it has to do with feng shui and the bagua. In 3 weeks time, my practice had suddenly tripled. I mean, it hadn't just grown a little bit, it hadn't just doubled, it had tripled. And the only difference was I put a lamp in that corner of my office. So it was an odd thing, but it was very convincing once my teacher laid out the bagua on my office and showed me how I needed to think about it. So we can use different tools for stimulating different areas of the bagua if you have a problem, like a health problem or a family issue, or if you are, you know, wanting to stimulate knowledge, then you put a lamp or you put a plant or you put a fountain, a water, some kind of movement, a fish tank in knowledge. So anyway, all the different parts of life can be laid out this way with the bagua. I feel like I have barely done justice. I'm going to stop screen sharing now. Oh, wait, yeah, and show you a couple more things before we close. How can you talk about, you know, 5,000 years of Taoism in an hour? That's almost impossible. But what I would like to say is that this is one of I put a bunch of little stickies into this book that I wanted to read to you, but we didn't really get to them. This is the Tao Te Ching, a translation by Stephen Mitchell. And this is one of my favorites. This one it's a tiny little book. And I've had this, I can't even remember when I picked this up. I was reading this in my 20s. So I love this book. It's my favorite translation, but there are so many. And then there is also this one that some of you might recognize by Jane English, and also Jia Fa Feng, and Jane English did this one, the Tao Te Ching. This is a lovely book because it has these wonderful, well, you're not going to be able to see very well, but it'll have a chapter and then it'll have a photo as well. So it's got some very lovely photos in here, and it's a good translation too, although I do like Stephen Mitchell better. Jane English and Jia Fa Feng actually also put together this one. It looks like the same book, but it isn't. This is Chuanzi. So these are the inner chapters and the outer chapters of Chuanzi. And Chuanzi was one of Elizabeth Rochat's favorite subjects. So many very wonderful stories that Chuanzi brought to us. A couple more books and then I'll stop talking. This is actually one of my favorite. It's called Cultivating Stillness. I know you get the glare from if I can get the glare off of it, maybe you can see it. Cultivating Stillness is by Eva Huang. And this one is called The Taoist Manual for Transforming Body and Mind. It is a very basic book on Taoist alchemy. There's plenty in here. There's just plenty of good reading in here, but it's so I wouldn't call it, it's not really basic. I mean, well, I've underlined all kinds of stuff in it. Here's another I wanted to show you some other diagrams, but another way in which they show okay, that one doesn't want to jump out. Different ways of showing yin and yang symbols. And this is also a book I really love called Taoism by John Blofeld. John Blofeld. I would highly recommend this book. They're not huge books, you know, but they're, I really love this one too. I've been packing up my books and these ones were in random places around the house. So I grabbed them as I was throwing boxes in books. Well, not throwing them, lovingly placing them in books. This one is called The Great Tao by Stephen Chang. And this one actually has all of the exercises in it and diagrams and stuff. But you can't really learn that way. You can't learn yoga on TV either. You know, you really have to be corrected, because if your postures are not perfect, I mean the tiniest little things can open or close the flow of qi. So you can't learn that. You need a teacher for that. And I don't know, when I get to Ojai, I'm hoping that we'll have some very basic Qigong classes for those of you who might want to get up early and practice immortality. So anyhow, thank you so much. And I didn't even leave time for questions.
All right, well, we can email any questions if we have. Does anybody have a burning question, a takeaway, a thank you? Yes, so Susan, thank you very much. Let me.
You're very welcome.